So without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce TM Logan. He's a fantastic author. We're really proud to publish him at MacMillan. He's published such books as The Window Breaks, The Interview, and forthcoming The Hunt is coming out, The House Hunt, sorry, is coming out on the 31st of August, and we're really excited. Before we get to that, I just want to introduce Chris from the Writers Community Podcast, and also TM Logan, who's going to be both of them are going to question Chris today, and we're really happy to have you both on board, so thank you very much. So without further ado, please join me in a round of applause in welcoming TM Logan. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming and joining in on this conversation. You are able to ask questions, so if you do have them, please let us know. We're going to have a chat with Chris about his kind of writing career and his new book, which is on those massive signs right there. Tim Logan is helping us out, and he, by the way, has just signed a brand new contract, which is amazing as well. So well done to you. And we're going to get stuck into it. So please enjoy. And like I said, if you've got questions, first of all, hello, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Yeah, it's a delight to be here.
Excellent.
It's always good to be back in Harrogate, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Being back in Harrogate, would presume you've been here a few times before?
I was trying to think, because you just asked David in a previous interview. I think I first came in 2006.
Okay.
Did it exist in 2006? If it did, I came then. And a bit like David, I was doing Creative Thursday that year.
Okay.
So it was the year, I think later that year I got my first publishing deal.
Amazing.
So I've come most years, I think, and it's always a highlight of the year.
Yeah. Do we have people that are here for the first time? Yeah, okay. Every time, what advice have you got for someone who's here for the first time at Harrogate?
I mean, you will find your own way. The thing I would say, I distinctly remember walking into the bar the first night and not knowing a soul and being really freaked out and really scared and sort of turning around and going back to my room for a bit and then coming back down. But it really is just about being a little bit brave and talking to the person next to you, having a chat, and you will very quickly make friends and find stuff to talk about and other books that we all love.
Yeah, excellent. So we're looking at your brand new book, which is The House Hunt.
Yes.
Well advertised on your big for sale signs.
Yes.
Tell everybody about that book, and then we can have a look at kind of the process about how that came around and the inspirations for that as well.
So the story in The House Hunt, there's a young couple called Lucy and Sam who have renovated their dream home in Putney in London, but they've thrown everything at it. They're on the breadline, their finances are in trouble, they desperately need to sell. And Lucy is just finishing tidying up the house for a viewing. And then she realises that she's missed a phone call. And when she checks her phone, she has a voicemail from her estate agent that says, "I'm really sorry, I'm having a crazy day, I'm running late for the viewing. The guy that's coming today is called Donovan, he's a really good prospect. Do you mind just starting the house tour, showing him around before I get there?" And as that message finishes, the doorbell goes. And Lucy finds herself opening the door to this very charming, very handsome man, Donovan, who seems like the ideal buyer. And she's boxed in. She has to invite him in and begin the house tour. And very soon afterwards, she begins to realise there's something off about Donovan. He's there for other reasons. She asks him to leave. He refuses, and the book's about what happens next.
Fantastic.
I love it. I love it when you get a news.
That's the first of the day.
Yes,
yeah,
wow.
Fantastic. So that concept is very kind of different to a lot of your usual stories you see in the crime genre. So why did you have that idea in the first place, and was there something that prompted you to go down that route?
It's a collection of things, really. A bit like Tim, we're writing in the same domain of these kind of everyday situations where things go sideways, where things that might be an ordinary experience that you would have suddenly turn sinister. And so I'm always looking for those kind of experiences. So my previous book was called The Interview, which was about a job interview that turned wrong. And then the other thing was personal experience, really. About 9 years ago, my wife and I moved back to my hometown of Taunton. We'd been living on the Isle of Man. We were on this endless house hunt, and we went on this particular house viewing, which was one of the strangest experiences of my life. So the estate agent met us at the door and she said, "Something a bit strange. The owner of the house won't go out while I'm showing you the house." But it got even weirder because he then insisted on conducting the house tour while we were going round, basically sidelined the estate agent, but then room by room told us His wife had cheated on him. She was leaving him. They were splitting up.
Wow.
He didn't want to sell the house. This was the room where that happened. This was the room where that happened. And it was the most excruciating experience you can imagine.
Did you buy it?
And yeah, it freaked us out. I mean, we just left, and the estate agent apologised profusely and said he's done it on literally every viewing, and it just made me realise what a weird thing a house viewing is. You know, even if you have a normal house viewing, if you're selling your house, you're still having strangers come in, looking in cupboards you might not want them to look in, and it just seemed one of those opportunities that was right for sort of writing about it, really.
Incredible, yeah. Have you any questions on that, Tim?
No, I mean, I've just at the current, or have been going through the process of house hunting myself. Ooh. And we've looked at lots of places, and it is a really kind of quite a weird, intrusive thing, because normally the owners are not there, they've gone out, or they're down the street waiting for you to finish, and it is quite an unusual situation, and the fact that someone's got your house key, they can just let themselves in, I think it is, I think it's a sort of really fertile area of ground for fiction and for thrillers for us. So yeah,
I think that's what makes a really effective thriller in that sense, is because it is relatable and it is something that could happen in that situation. So it's interesting. Have you had any feedback from your readers that maybe were in a similar situation, perhaps like you were?
Not yet in terms of the house hunt, because it's such early days, we're at proof stage. But I have pitched ideas in the past, trying to come up with, I mean, we were just talking about coming up with these ideas about ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, and occasionally pitched an idea that's made somebody go sort of pale. There was one I couldn't quite make it work, but I had an idea. Don't steal this, Tim. It was a married couple had bought driving lessons for their 17-year-old daughter for her birthday, and the doorbell goes and it's her first lesson, and the driving car's in the drive, and they send her off, and then half an hour later the doorbell goes, there's an identical driving car on the drive, and a new instructor, and they suddenly realise to their horror they've sent their daughter off with a complete imposter. And I told
it's very good. Yeah.
I told the guy this idea who just had sent his daughter off on driving lessons, and he went, why? Because he was saying, well, I didn't check the credentials of the person that came. You know, you don't think of these things. So sometimes you're trying to get that kind of ooh moment. I think that's what you're looking for.
Fantastic. It's a very good concept. So for someone like yourself then, who was attending these events, was writing something that had happened in your life before you got to Harrogate, or was it something inspired by, for example, being here?
Yeah, I've been writing for years. So I started writing my first very bad novel when I was 20. Got taken on by a literary agent when I was 21. And when I first met her, she said, bear in mind, most people don't get published with their first book. She represented Ian Banks. She said he thought that he didn't get published till he'd written 1 million words.
Right.
And she said, yeah, most people, third or fourth book they get published on. And it proved to be true for me. It took me another 10 years and another 4 books to get published. And my first Harrogate came probably about halfway through that journey. So it was just before I'd written my first crime novel when I came here.
So have you got advice for someone then who's writing early on in their writing career journey about that process and having that patience to keep moving forwards while you know it might not happen straight away?
It's a really weird thing, isn't it? Because you're playing this game with yourself where you're trying to deceive yourself into thinking you might get published and it might come good, all the while knowing that there's a lot of luck involved in the whole process, and who knows if it's ever going to happen for you. But you have to keep going, you have to blindly keep going. But my main advice, spawned off what that first literary agent said to me, is probably don't imagine that your first book might necessarily be your first published book.
Okay.
Which it may be for Tim, I know it is for lots of people, but the mistake I made was my first manuscript I rewrote over about a 4-year period, and I would have been much better served after a year saying, now let's try something new. Let's take what I've learned from writing that first book and try a different story and see if that appeals. So that's my main slightly bleak takeaway, is be prepared to move on from that first book you've written.
Have you got any good interactions with readers that have kind of maybe inspired how your writing goes, or is it always like just a way where you accept kind of the reader feedback, or do you ever use it for your writing?
It's always lovely to get reader feedback, and if you get a really encouraging email, it's the best feeling in the world, isn't it? And it can really motivate you. I think readers might underestimate that. The number of days when you're sat down and you're thinking, I don't quite know what I'm going to do today, I've hit a brick wall, you might get an email saying, I read X book, I loved it, and it really perks you up. Sorry, I've forgotten what you said.
No, that's fine. I'm talking about how the reader interaction can basically benefit your writing.
I did have one key one, which was years ago. My first ever book was called The Good Thief's Guide to Amsterdam, and it was about a burglar. And I got an email after that book was first published from somebody who's saying, I've just been on holiday to Malta. I was in the airport. Your book was on sale in the carousel at the airport. I bought it, I read it, I enjoyed it, and when I got to the back, I saw in your biography that you live on the Isle of Man, and I live on the Isle of Man, and he said, you've written about a burglar, and while you've not got anything technically wrong in your book, I didn't know if you actually knew how to pick locks, and if you don't, do you want to meet up and I'll show you how to do it? And so I said, yes, but let's meet somewhere public.
Right, yeah.
And I met this guy. He turned up to Douglas, the main town on the Isle of Man, a cafe. And sadly, he wasn't a burglar. He was an accountant whose hobby was picking locks.
Right.
And he turned up with a fishing tackle box that he opened on the table in front of me. And it was full of picking guns and lock picks and dummy keys and all these things. And within about 30 seconds, he'd show me how to shim a padlock, which is a particular technique for opening a pretty cheap padlock, and then he taught me how to pick locks, and it was amazing. And then I obviously put all that information into the future books.
And you weren't concerned at that meeting at all, or?
No, I would have been concerned if he'd followed me home. I did go home and then try and pick the lock on my front door, and I couldn't do it. So it was kind of reassuring in a way.
Oh, incredible. So so your transition into the writing world then, and it took you a long time to get into the position where you felt that was going in the right direction. Obviously became a bestseller as well. How did you receive that feedback, knowing that your journey wasn't kind of a swift one in that sense, that you've had that sort of recognition?
Well, you just cherish every opportunity to be published and to write. I mean, it takes such a lot of effort and a long time, and there's a lot of disappointment along the way. There was for me anyway, and so I think it just makes you value the opportunity and work as hard as you possibly can. I know Tim will be the same. I'm sure working endless hours trying to make the next book better than the last book, and really trying to improve your craft. And I think it keeps you honest, really.
Fantastic. Tim, have you got anything else? You had a good question burning earlier.
No, I was just going to say about the feedback from people. It's just don't go on Goodreads. If you want to not feel really bad about your writing, because that's a bit of a because your brain will always kind of fall to the 1-star review and to the kind of because that's the way I think we're wired to sort of look for the worst. But I was going to ask you about the sort of the thriller genre that we both write in. Do you think it's become more difficult in the last sort of 4 or 5 years with it becoming really, really popular, sort of domestic suspense particularly? Do you think it's become harder to sort of find something new to write, or is it always something extra?
I mean, I'd be interested in your take on it. I think it's always difficult. I mean, I don't think it's an easy thing to come up with a hook that people want to read. I think I am more aware that I need to pressure test every idea I come up with, and it needs to be the strongest possible hook it can be. And the lovely ooh that everyone gave me earlier, if I can come up with an idea that I don't know if my editor would ever ooh to me, but if I can come up with an idea that might spark that kind of response, that's what you're looking for. And I think more and more I take longer and push myself harder to really spend time come up with multiple ideas, but the one that's really going to stick, and try. I think as well over the years you get more of a sense of which ideas are going to work as a book and which might fall away. I mean, do you find the same thing?
Yeah, and I think when I'm thinking of ideas or trying to develop new ideas for a new book, it's always the ones that you kind of keep coming back to in your head. And I may have an idea on a Monday, and I'll write some notes, and then if the following week and the week after that, when I'm doing the washing up, it kind of is still occurring to me and still kind of turning over in my mind, then that is always a good sign, because it always feels like that's going to have potential to make a full-length book and to sort of keep my interest, because you've got to keep your own interest as well while you're writing it for over that period of 6 or 9 months. It's got to be interesting to you first of all to get to the end, so that's always a good test.
Yeah, very good. We talked earlier about about how research happens in writing with some of the other guests. How do you approach something like the house hunt when it comes to the sort of thriller and the crime genre, or the element of that story? How do you research how to write those sort of situations?
Well, the beauty is I don't have to do any research, really. I mean, these ideas, because they're about things that could happen to people in everyday circumstances, generally need very little research. I think the key thing I'm trying to do with these books is write the thrillers in real time. So in the house hunt, the whole thriller really takes place during the house viewing. So it's a very compressed, very claustrophobic thriller. And the challenge really is, how do you break down every moment to its constituent parts and make those thrilling and build the suspense, and how can you do that? And then generally speaking, I find if there's something I do need to research, I will wing it when I'm writing the draft, and 9 times out of 10 when you then research it later, the reality matches what you've made up, I find.
Fantastic, yeah. Has anyone got any questions for Chris? Anyone out there? Silence. There was.
Choose someone if no one puts their hand up.
Yeah. Right, volunteer.
There you go.
Oh, go on.
Chris, have you ever had a weird experience when selling a house or viewing a house that inspired this book?
I think you missed.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm a late.
Let me tell you about it afterwards. A very good experience.
Anyone else? Nope. Cool. We have.
I still missed what happened with the driving story. Was that not accepted as an idea, or
the driving lesson idea? It wasn't accepted by me as an idea. I got some way down the track, and then I realised the problem is with that idea. The scenes in the driving lesson car where somebody's on their first lesson going at about 12 miles an hour, very hard to make suspenseful. So I might revisit it at some point, but yeah, I just couldn't swing that one.
Okay. And a question that I've been asking everyone today is, if you could step into a fictional world of any fictional story for the day, what fictional world do you want to spend the day in?
Oh. That's an amazing question, and I'm going to slightly cop out by saying, so a couple of years ago, my daughter, who's 10, read all the Harry Potter books, which I had not personally read, and just seeing her fall into that world and being completely encapsulated in that world, I think I'd want to be in the Harry Potter world so she could experience that with me.
Would you have a choice of houses, or you're not that far into it?
Oh, well, I mean, it would have to be Gryffindor, wouldn't it? Okay. Otherwise she'd banish me from the whole thing.
Amazing. So, what about yourself, Tim? Have you got an answer to that one?
Well, which house I'd be in? I've been told I'd be Slytherin by someone I used to work with, but I don't know enough to know whether that's true or not. But
amazing.
A fictional world. I don't know. I quite fancy having a dragon, so Game of Thrones maybe.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah,
having your own dragon, that would be quite.
Lots happens in that world.
Instead of, if there's a train strike, you could just
play on a dragon. Well, as you come to Wales, we all do it. Okay, so before we finish this up, then, Chris, what's the next stage for you? Are you already looking ahead with your writing, or are you still focused on?
No, you're very much ahead. So I'm about midway through a second draft of another book, which has a tentative title of The Lift Home. And it's about a couple who are driving home from a weekend break in Cornwall, who spot a woman stranded with a baby who's broken down in her car, and they are put in a position where they offer her a lift, and it's a bad move.
Of course, shouldn't get in a car with strangers.
Is the baby a Roman?
Yeah, the baby should Game of Thrones.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic, guys. We are up with our time. Thank you to Chris, and thank you for Tim for helping me out. Thank you for all being here, and I'm pretty sure Jamie is going to do the raffle right now. But can we please give a round of applause to our guests? Thank you. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you for taking the time to fill me in on your exciting weekend ahead. Hi Phil, I'm at the Harrogate Crime Writers Festival with my sister Julie and her husband Hugh. I am Chris, host of the Writing Community Chat Show, and I'll be interviewing authors all weekend for the big MacMillan publishing company. Do you know what? I love the Harrogate Crime Writers Festival. I can't make it this year, and I'm really sad. I normally go. And if you've never heard of it, it's basically all the crime writers that you see in your bookshops. They're all there. It's really informal, and it's held at the Old Swan Hotel. And the reason it's held there is because supposedly that's the hotel where Agatha Christie turned up in the late 30s after she'd gone missing, right? And it's an amazing story. I don't know if you know this story, but she goes missing and there's a big national search for Agatha Christie, right? Obviously very famous in her day, not just latterly. And they bring in Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock stories, to try and find her. Can you imagine that now? Imagine someone famous going missing now and they bring in Lee Child to conduct the search. It's crazy, isn't it? But that's a true story.